Okay, we're going to look today, given that the month of Elul is coming up, and we start getting into the topic of Teshuva, of repentance. What I want to look at is the story of David and Batsheva, which is a very powerful story. The fact is the story of David and Batsheva. One of the significance it has is that David is considered to be the model of Teshuva. There are two individuals who are considered to be the models of Teshuva, of repentance. One is Yehuda in the story with Tamar from the book of Bereshis, where Yehuda accuses his daughter-in-law of adultery, of a sort of quasi-adultery act, and then he basically admits his mistake. And that is considered to be one of the great episodes of Teshuva. Yehuda is considered to be one of the models of Teshuva when he said, Tzedka mimeni.
Why? Yeah. Why would that be such a... I mean, in our ordinary lives, something like that could happen, and I don't know if we necessarily think that was such a...
Right. That's one of the things I want to get into. Okay. In the sense, but the fact is just to go over the case. It's a bit difficult to understand the case because of the value system at the time. But Yibum was a very powerful concept in the times. We still have the concept of Yibum that if a brother dies childless, then his wife is to go to one of the remaining brothers to maintain the progeny and so forth and so forth. Now, in our present world situation, present values, it's somewhat, questioning, telling a woman that she's now got to go live with another man, the brother of her spouse, somewhat problematic. And the fact is that there are issues within so forth. So we now do chalitza, where we basically it's a separation ceremony that ends the connection, and then the woman can go on and marry someone else. But in the ancient times, it seems that Yibum was a very serious practice, and it wasn't just with the brother, it was any family member. So you have in the book of Ruth that since Ruth's husband died childless, the whole family was under consideration who's now going to marry Ruth in order to have a progeny with Ruth, in order to have children with Ruth, to maintain the family name. It's not just the fact of having children. It seems to be a concept where there's some significance there in terms of the woman not being left alone. In that society, it was very real that a woman needed a husband to maintain some type of existence, protection, so forth. So therefore, there's an idea that the family would maintain, a certain amount of concern for a dead brother's wife, or a dead family member's wife. In the time of Yehuda, what happened is that Tamar was married to one son, and that son died. She went and married another son, and that son died. So there was a third son of Yehuda who was underage, and Yehuda said, when he becomes of age, well, I'll arrange for you to marry him. And he became of age, and Yehuda didn't arrange the marriage. Yehuda was concerned because since the other two sons died, he was a little reluctant to let the third son marry Tamar. He thought she was what's termed a katlanis, which is a woman whose husbands keep on dying, something like what do you call it? A black widow, right? I mean, there's actually halachic issues of that. But the fact is that wasn't the case with Tamar. She was really a tzedekis. But the point is that Tamar was upset with this. So what Tamar did is she dressed up as a prostitute and went by the road and basically seduced her father-in-law, her ex-father-in-law, and so forth. Now that aspect of Yibum doesn't apply today. It's only the brother that's allowed. A father-in-law continues to be actually an ancestral relationship, but this was before Sinai, and one of the extensions of Yibum was that you could fulfill Yibum with another family, even the father-in-law. So she basically was at the crossroads as the prostitute and seduced Yehuda and so forth, and Yehuda slept with her, and she became pregnant. So all the people around said, Yehuda, your former daughter-in-law became pregnant, and this was considered to be a great travesty in those days. It was almost considered to be like adultery. She was destined to marry the brother, the other family member. She had no right to look for someone else, so it was considered to be almost an adulterous relationship, and she was sentenced to death. And they said to Yehuda, you know, she's obviously pregnant. It's not from you, so obviously she broke the commitment. So Yehuda was ready to sentence her to death, and she said at the last minute, just want you to know that the person who's the father of this kid, this is this person's stick and purse, or stick and cloak. And the fact is that was Yehuda, because Yehuda was the person who was cloak. Yehuda left them, because at Tamar he didn't have anything to pay Tamar with, so he said, okay, listen, I'm going to leave my stuff with you, and then I'll come back with the money. And she left. So when she comes and says, hey, this is who's the father, so Yehuda says, wow, I see, I made a mistake because I didn't set you up, and you were so vehement in following the tradition and arranging this, so Tzad Kamimeni, you did the right thing, and that's fine. But the fact is, Yehuda beforehand was ready to kill her, and he changes around and says, it's my fault, and the real reason it's my fault is I was supposed to set you up with my other son, and I didn't do that, and you took the tradition in your own hands to follow through.
I guess it was also a public declaration that he went to a...
Right. Well, the interesting thing about that is that's how Yehuda can go to a prostitute is an interesting issue. Well, most commentators say that Yehuda did not have free choice at that point in time. Okay, the simple answer about it is that God took away his free choice. The position of Maimonides...
So was it really a big deal?
The position of Maimonides is that before Sinai, prostitution wasn't prohibited, which raises an interesting question in terms of the Noahide laws, which are the laws that are applicable to non-Jews. Is there a prohibition of prostitution? And according to Maimonides, it doesn't seem to be a prohibition of prostitution.
Do they really say that he didn't have free choice? Like just
yes.
He made a mistake?
There are commentaries who say that he didn't have free choice.
I have a problem with that.
The devil made me do it.
Yeah, almost like that, but God made him do it. Yeah. But Maimonides' position is very interesting. He basically says in the Morah, he says, before Sinai there was no prohibition of prostitution, no prohibition of prostitution on Noachites. And anyways, he says that's basically it. It's interesting because he makes some other statements that raise certain issues. Okay, but the fact is we won't get it especially on tape. But the fact is that it's an interesting question. I mean, the fact is that it's an interesting question, especially in our modern society, of all the sexual prohibitions are going through a microscope in our society today. And things that 50 years ago, 100 years ago were taken as absolute ethical standards, now they're coming under a lot of scrutiny. Homosexuality is obviously one that comes to mind, but it seems to be that even things like prostitution, where it was obviously considered to be immoral 100 years ago, now it's like you have women very openly saying, this is my profession, and it's a good paying profession, and why not, and so forth. And people basically are saying, well, why not, and so forth. And now there's arguments. I've seen arguments for adultery, open marriages. I've seen arguments for the idea of monogamy being problematic from psychological viewpoints, and so forth. So all the sexual all of sexual morality is becoming under scrutiny, and people saying, why not? I remember once I was giving a class it was a program for senior citizens, And we got into the topic of incest, and I asked them, think about this: if a man 28 years old wants to marry his 26-year-old sister, and it's totally, I asked him, what do you think is the problem with incest? And he immediately responded with ideas of imposition of a father upon a daughter, things of that nature, which was, obviously violence or aspects of control. But I said, what's wrong with a 25-year-old man saying, I want to marry my 25-year-old sister? And now, there's obviously reactions to it, something that bothers us, but why would you prohibit a 28-year-old man from marrying a 25-year-old woman who has to be a sister? And they immediately said, well, there's a problem with genetics and progress. I said, what happens if they agree not to have any children? What happens if they agree to do amniocentesis before having a child or whatever, assuming that, okay, let's not get into the issue of abortion and so forth. And basically in that whole room, they basically said, you're right. We can't figure out any reason for not doing it. So it raises an interesting aspect that a lot of our sexual morality is now coming under under scrutiny, and it forces us to. Obviously, it doesn't force us to challenge the Torah law. I mean, the Torah law is the Torah law, but it forces us to reconsider things that we took for granted before, and we took certain things as obviously ethically correct and so forth. That really was a side effect of the sexual revolution, where basically people said, why? And that's it. That's one of the reasons that in a lot of religious places they're always afraid of the question why, because the question why gets people to start thinking and so forth. They may not have a good answer, so it raises a lot of issues. But the point is that from a Torah perspective, we don't ask the question why necessarily to challenge the law. We don't challenge the law basically, but the question why is a very, very important question to ask to understand the underlying value considerations. Anyways, that's the story of Yehuda, and he is example of Teshuva, where he says, I made a mistake, but okay. The other good example of Teshuva is David, and here's also a very it's a very interesting case. David, the way it starts off is that David is on his roof, and he notices Batsheva on house nearby on her roof, bathing. Basically sees Batsheva and is attracted to her, and basically sends someone over there to go get Batsheva and basically bring her over, and they sleep together. And the point is, Batsheva is the wife of Uriah Hittite. So it seems that David commits adultery, and sees Batsheva is very acquiescent to this. So the point is what then goes on is that David wants to stay with Batsheva and so forth. So he arranges for Uriah Hittite, who's a soldier, to be sent to the front of the line. He takes a general and says, okay, I want you to send Uri there, and I want you to make sure he's in a good battle that's going to get him killed. And Uriah Hittite is killed, and David then marries Batsheva. So what happens is that God's not happy with this, and he sends Natan Hanavi, the prophet Natan, to sort of tell David he did something wrong. He says over a parable to David, and David says the parable basically is that there's a rich man with much flock, and there's one man who has just one little sheep, and this one man really took care of the sheep and brought the sheep up with his children, and almost like a child to him. And the rich man has a guest coming by, and the rich man basically takes the sheep of the poor man and kills it for the feast for the guest, rather than taking one of his flock. So, and Nathan says, "This is what happened. What do you think we should do?" And David says, "I think the guy should get killed." He was really very furious.
Everybody was getting killed in those days.
Yeah. I mean, basically, his language is David. What do you think you should do? And David is like furious. He said, "Hirav David be'ish ma'od." He's really angry at this person, and he says, by God, this guy should be killed, and so forth. So Nathan says, "Well, it's you." Okay? And David says at that point in time, he says the powerful words of Chatasi Lashem. He says, you're right, I sinned. And the Gemara tells us that because David responded with just saying, "You're right, I sinned," that's why he didn't lose his kingdom. He said Shalom Saul lost his kingdom for one sin, the sin of allowing the king of Amalek to live and the sheep of the cattle of Amalek to live. And he said, because he said, "Well, what are you talking about? I did the right thing. He tried to say I did the right." Eventually, Shaul says, "You're right, I made a mistake," but it was already too late. His first response was to try and justify himself. David sees this and says, "You're right, Chatasi Hashem, I sinned." Okay, and that's the example. That's why he is the example of repentance. The fact is that both stories, Yehuda's story and David's story, are fascinating to really see what's the sin, what's the mistake, what's the problem. David's story is extremely fascinating because him basically saying, "You're right, I'm sorry, I made a mistake," doesn't really deal with the problem. And the Gemara asks this question. A lot of commentators ask this question. David sinned with Batsheva, right? It seems that they had a tryst, they had an affair, and it seems that Batsheva even got pregnant, and David basically had this affair with a married woman, and actually got her husband killed. As king, he arranged for the guy to get killed. So now he says, "I'm sorry." So when you do tshuva, is that enough just to say you're sorry? If David really wanted to repent, what do you think he should do, right? So the fact is that we have a halacha that says that a married woman who has an affair can no longer stay with her husband and cannot be with the lover. There's a thing that a woman who has an affair is asur on the baal and asur on the boil. She now becomes prohibited to her husband and prohibited to her lover. So the fact is here David, basically stays with Batsheva. So everyone says, "Well, how can he do that?"
And nobody talks about how she sinned. I don't know.
Well, it does get interesting in terms of Batsheva, and what about her? She does Teshuva, and out of this, the first son of theirs dies, but they're together, and not only that, and they have Shlomo.
And Shlomo ascends to the kingdom.
Right, ascends to the kingdom, and is also the father of Mashiach. Okay, the Mashiach is destined to be descended from Shlomo HaMelech. So the fact is David's doing Teshuva. It's very, very nice, You're right, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Okay, let's just go on. He still ends up with the kingdom, the woman. It's like you would expect that something you should say. You're right. I can't stay with
no consequence.
Right. There's no consequence. So the fact is, that is an underlying thought here to try and figure out, so what's really happening here, and what's David's Teshuva? How could David be the example of Teshuva if he doesn't? If he really doesn't pay the consequences? There's a concept in Teshuva. In fact, if you look at the example over here of the sheep, the example is given is an example of theft. It seems that there's this rich man and the poor man, and that's the way David sees it. He says there's a rich man and a poor man, and the rich man, rather than taking from his own flock, takes this one little sheep from the poor man. So David gets angry. He says, "You have so much sheep of your own. Why did you take the poor man's sheep?" and he basically says this person should pay, and he says he should pay like a fourfold, which really connects to a halacha that says that if a person steals a sheep and steals some cattle and kills the cattle, right? Usually we say if someone steals, found guilty, he has to pay double back. In the case of stealing an animal, right, he has to bring back stealing. He has to bring 4 times as much. So it's considered to be that's where this idea of 4 times is that this is considered to be like a theft situation, right? That there has to be some kind of compensation. And over here, what's the compensation? David just says he's sorry. Now, eventually, his first son with Batsheva does die, and there is a punishment, but it doesn't seem to be an aspect of Teshuva. If you steal something from someone else, you are supposed to repay it.
But he was dead.
So the fact is that if you do something to someone who's dead, you're especially supposed to go to their grave and pay the estate, and also you're supposed to go to the grave and ask forgiveness from the soul. But the fact is, it seems over here like what really is going on over here, in the sense, especially if you consider David to be the example of Teshuva. So that's what.
Question.
Yeah.
Uriah Hittite.
Yeah.
Was he a Hittite, or was he a Jew?
I think he was a Jew. I'm not sure why. I know.
Uriah Hittite.
I know. I'm not sure why. I'm sure that somewhere in my memory, I know the question. But he's not. He's Jewish. He's Jewish. There's no doubt he's Jewish. I mean, he's under the rule of the Jewish king.
Would that be significant if he wasn't?
Don't even get into that one.
Okay.
I don't
Sorry.
know.
Well, if he was not Jewish, then you have the issue of the Batsheva being intermarried.
Correct. Yeah.
And marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew does not have halachic significance. A Jew cannot marry a non-Jew halachically. We say that kedusha on tofsu, which means that there is no bond of marriage from a halachic perspective. So if Mr. Mendzewski goes off to Israel and wants to leave Chelsea, right, and goes before the Bezdin because it's under family law in Israel, is under the Bezdin will say, you're not married. We just not married halachically. Okay, so that would be an example. So the fact is marriage is. I'm not sure, but there is a question why it's called Uriah Hittite, and I forget why.
Were the Hittites still around during the time of David? He ruled over everybody. I mean, David was a conqueror too.
Right. Very large conqueror.
It's possible that.
Yeah, but he was clearly Jewish.
Yeah.
But I forget. I know the question. I forget the. I know I've seen it before. So the truth is, the story. This story is a very fascinating story of what really happened here, and it becomes significant in understanding why the repentance of David is so interesting. So, in looking at this situation here, there's one question that always bothered me, and you tell me what you think about this question. A man. He compares it to the situation here where David had many, many wives, and he's compared to the man who has a large amount of flock. Okay, Uriah Hittite is considered to have one wife, and he's compared to the man who has one sheep, right? And it's terrible that the guy with many, many wives wants the one sheep of the poor man. And I found that comparison a little bit problematic. Okay? Any comments on that?
What do you say about the women?
There wasn't thought. I mean, he was on the roof. He saw her.
Okay.
In other words,
there's an aspect over here. See, what's interesting over here is there's a very strong aspect of sexuality, and that's already part of it. I mean, you see, like this is that it came to pass one evening that David arose from his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very fair to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and said, and one said, "Is not this Batsheva the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Okay, and David sent messengers and took her, and she came into him, and he lay with her, okay, and so forth. So the fact is, it seems to be that this was a based upon sexual attraction. David saw Batsheva basically bathing, and somehow Batsheva acquiesced to it. There was no sense of force and so forth. So that's one issue over here. It seems to be very, very sexual, which raises the issue of David being the tzaddik that he is, and this relationship with David and Batsheva being the family of the parents of Shlomo Melech, and basically the progeny of the Davidic, the ancestors of the Davidic dynasty. But just in terms of how we understand marriage and the relationship of husband and wife, the reason this always bothered me is because someone has many, many wives, does that necessarily mean he's not interested in finding someone else? The fact is that when we think in terms of marriage, I don't think it matters how many people you're married to in a polytheistic, in a polygamous relationship. It's a matter of whether you have that one person that you are in love with, that you have a connection with, right? So the fact is that I could see I'm sure it's portrayed this way in the movies, right? Although there's a few movies on this presented, I haven't seen them, but I'm sure it's portrayed in the movie that David may have had many, many wives, many, many concubines, and all these women, but he had a love for Batsheva. He was attracted to Batsheva. They fell in love, and we would not think of that as so problematic. But also we'd say we could put a romantic bent on it and say, you see, even though he had all these wives and so forth, this is the one woman that swept him off his feet, and it was very romantic and so forth. Now, there's a problem though, because she's married, right? So I say, in other words, if Batsheva was single, the fact that she's, let's say, a girlfriend with someone else, or someone but not married, and some guy comes around and has many, many wives, and basically they fall in love, we would sit there and say, well, the fact that he has many wives it's not the same as a lot of sheep, and you have to chef this sheep for the supper and another one. I don't think you look at it that way. It's sort of like, you have many, many wives, so what do you want her for? I mean, like, you sort of think, well, maybe there's something there. So that always hit me interesting in this story about some type of issues of how do you look at this in terms of the attraction between the two. And the fact that she was married is obviously raises another issue in this, because even if there was attraction to, it doesn't really matter whether David had many other wives or not. If the sin is the fact that he slept with a married woman, it doesn't matter that he has 23 other wives. It's to say, hey, listen, if you want to use the analogy of the sheep, you don't have any sheep, doesn't matter, but you still wanted that sheep. And that's still wrong because it wasn't yours. It didn't belong to you. So the fact is that there's certain issues in this comparison raises issues. In other words, is what David did wrong because he had so many other wives, or is what he did wrong because basically Batsheva was a married woman?
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Are you going to come up with a commentary that says this is like Potiphar's wife, where he had a nevuah that Shlomo HaMelech is going to come from this woman? So, please don't.
I wanted to say something else.
Okay, Sue's referring to a statement that Potiphar's wife, if you know the story of Joseph, right? Joseph was a slave there and so forth, and Potiphar's wife, was the whole story that he was the head slave and so forth and so forth. So his mistress comes on to him, basically tries to seduce him or.
Nishma from the play.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's Potiphar's wife. So the Medrash says is the reason that Potiphar's wife wanted so badly to sleep with Joseph. We're saying Joseph with Yosef, is because she had a vision that she will have children with Yosef. Okay, and the fact is, if you look at it, Yosef ends up marrying Potiphar, her daughter. So the point is that the Medrash says, you see, she's a progeny would come from a union with Yosef, but she was mistaken. It wasn't with her; it was with her daughter. It's a famous Medrash. So Sue's saying, "Are you going to sow the same thing over here?" That David saw that there'll be children from there.
Right. Isn't there a parish that says that Uriah Hitti was many years in the army, and therefore this really wasn't, quote, adultery on Batsheva's part, because she hadn't seen her husband for 7, 8, 9 years.
But she wasn't a Naguna.
No, because he sent them to the
She wasn't a Naguna.
But
yeah.
Being away from your wife doesn't give you to the
this
get.
is what I heard.
Okay.
This
So
is what I heard, because they're trying to say that David HaMelech was a tzaddik.
Right.
I don't get
trying to find it.
Okay, so let me deal with both your issues, because the fact is that you're both bringing up something very significant. Sue is saying, hey, are you going to tell me that David saw through a prophecy that he was going to have kids with Batsheva? No. It's Batsheva who saw the prophecy.
Oh.
Okay. Batsheva had a vision, and there's actually a medrash that says that she was bathing, but up there on the roof.
She saw David HaMelech.
Because she knew that David used to go for his little walks, just go up to the roof, so she thought to bathe on the roof. And sort of like set it up. Right, thank you. So there is a medrash like that. And the fact is as Midrashim said, that Batsheva did have a vision that eventually there was a child, he was going to have a child with David. She was going to have a child with David. So, and this was a significant child, and so on and so forth. So there is that concept there. Okay. In your perspective, the Gemara in Shabbos says anyone who says that David did a sin makes a mistake. Is making a mistake. Because the Gemara and the Midrashim work through how this wasn't a sin in any way, shape, or form. There's two things David did. David slept with Batsheva, and he arranged for Uriah Hitti to get killed at the front. Right?
And that's not
okay. Now, that sounds like things you shouldn't do, right? It sounds like pretty big sins, right? So the fact is what they say is that David didn't really sin, because there were technical ways that he was able to do it. This might be what you're referring to.
And why did he say chatati?
That's what we're going to get to.
I just want to hear what the rest of it is.
We're going to have to get to it. The fact is what they say is that whenever anyone in David's army went to war, there was always a concern for a guna, okay, in terms of a person being lost at war, and that a wife would not be able to remarry. So one of two things occurred.
Oh, so they presented her with the divorce.
Right. So one thing says is that they give a get, okay, that they actually gave a get before went to war. However, that's a problem with the Kohanim, because once you give a get, you can't remarry. So, one person said they gave a get al tanai, and they said, "Here's a get, and if I don't come back to the house for a year, right, then this get is retroactively applicable." So that here on the 1st of January 2010, we give a get. If I don't come back, you don't see me in the house until January 1st, 2011. This get is retroactively applicable from January 1st, 2010. So David knows that Uri gave this get. Either he
How
gave
do
a
they know
get
all this? It's just
because
speculation.
It's standard.
It was standard procedure for people going to war. So Uri was in the army.
So all they had to do was arrange for him to die, and then everything's covered.
So now there's a little bit of a problem in there, because if he gave a get point blank, then she's already divorced. Okay, and there's some aspects how people learn this in the language here, because it says that she is, when David says who's that woman, he basically says the language he uses, the language that says is that's Batsheva bas Eliam Eshet Uriah Hitti, and some people should say the reason they say Eshet Uriah Hitti is say, yeah, she's married to Uriah Hitti, who must have given her a get because Uriah Hitti is a soldier. So David understood. Oh, okay. So if there was a real get, then real get. If it was not, it was a get on the time he doesn't come back, then David can make arrangements for him not to come back, and then she'll be. So that deals with the adultery.
He's committing murder.
So now David commits murder. Okay, so that's the other issue. Now the truth is there's something in the story that's a little problematic, because Uriah Hitti comes to the palace, and David says, "Why don't you go home?" Right? And Uriah Hitti says, "No, I'm going to stay here." And the truth is a lot of commentators say this is an interesting aspect, because David seems to be saying Uriah home. If Uriah would have went
Was this
home,
after the affair?
yeah, if Uriah would have went home, the get would make us. It's unfortunate to deal with that issue there, but on the surface, if Uriah Hitti gave a get, so the commentators say, don't think David sinned. He knew that Batsheva would be totally free because she gave a get. Either she gave her a get, and Uriah Hitti will not come back. Now, how can Uriah Hitti die? How can David make sure he dies? So the Meforshim say that Uriah Hitti actually was morid b'malchus. He rebelled against David. Now, the truth is there are indications of this in a certain language over here where he did not treat David with respect. Okay, David says, go do this, and he says no, and he basically acts in a way that sort of like discounts David as king.
Was this before the affair?
No, that's when he comes back and so forth. But it seems very repeated. There's a lot of contentions that he was a person who was not there were questions of treason against David, against him. So the fact is that under Jewish law, a king basically can execute someone who violates the commandment to honor a king. Seems to be that's the right of the king.
This doesn't make sense, because number one, he didn't have to send him to the front then. He could have just executed him, and it's still after the affair.
So the truth is, some commentators actually point this out and say, you know something? One of the issues with David is, you could have come down that straightforward. Why did you do a roundabout way?
And it was after.
Be a man.
And it was also after the affair.
Right. Well, the fact is, so you're saying, wait a second, he was a little bit, he was not impartial anymore. He's a little bit biased. I think this guy is treasonable, and the king has, in the court of the king, in Jewish law, there is a formal court that's very, very formal. You have to have 2 eyewitnesses, things like that, and so forth and so forth. The fact is that the formal court basically is impractical. Okay? Think about this, that you cannot find anyone guilty unless you have 2 eyewitnesses. Now, how many times do you think we have in our court system 2 eyewitnesses seeing a crime, or seeing any crime? You have to have 2 eyewitnesses. If we had to have 2 eyewitnesses in our court system, I don't think we'd have the log jam in our courts anymore. Okay? In addition to that, not only do you have to have 2 eyewitnesses, you have 2 eyewitnesses who warn the criminal, because ignorance of the law is an excuse within Jewish law. So, and therefore, under Jewish law, if you see someone about to murder someone, you have to have the 2 eyewitnesses who see each other, and they have to actually say, hey, if you kill that guy, you'll be violating the law of murder, and your punishment will be execution. Okay? And the murderer has to say, I know, but I don't care. If the murderer just keeps quiet, then he can argue, I didn't know the law. And ignorance of the law is a defense within the formal Jewish court system. So let's understand this. What do you think would be the chances of getting someone convicted of murder based upon 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 eyewitnesses who warn him in advance that it's against the law, and 2 ey and says, oh, I know it's against the law and I don't care. Do you think there's a very great chance of being executed in those situations?
I would guess once in 70 years.
Well, a little bit less than that. The fact is that there's actually a commentary points out that really execution of the formal system is not really because of the actual violation of law. It's because of the chutzpah, the absolute disregard of God. Because think about this, if a person basically says, I know God said not to do this, I don't care, right? I'm going to do it anyways. That changes the complete nature of the act. So when we think of all the things where people are punished and the heavy punishments in Jewish law, you get lashes for pork and you get executed for violating Shabbat. This commentary basically says, I forget who was one of the major Rishonim, basically says, they have to understand it. The guy had to basically say, I know God told me not to do it. I don't care. For that, that's kind of chutzpah. That is understanding. But the truth is, it's very, very hard to get convicted in the formal court system. So the truth is there are two informal court systems in the Jewish world that were allowed to act to protect law and order. Courts had an informal power to act for the purposes of protecting law and order. So if you had some who violated, let's say, Shabbat, and got off on a technicality, didn't have two eyewitnesses and so forth, that guy would walk scot-free. But if he murdered someone, or if he stole from someone, and he got off on a technicality because there were two eyewitnesses, an informal court system would come into effect and say, listen, okay, you're off the formal system now, we're acting to protect law and order. And on that level, we can do other things, circumstantial evidence and so forth, to protect society. That seemed to be the formal system of the courts. However, there was a much more formal informal system, which was called the Beit Din HaMelech, the king's court. And the king had judicial powers. And basically, he could do whatever is necessary for law and order. And he had no restrictions on what he could do. You know the famous story of Shlomo HaMelech with the two mothers? Mm-hmm. Okay? So think about this. Woman could come and say, who's the kid? And he says, you're right, it's both a kid, cut the kid in half. Right? It would dawn on you, how can you say cut the kid in half? How can he kill the kid? Right? Because that's the power of the Jewish king. If he said, for the purposes, whatever it is, for the purposes of law and order, cut the kid in half, then they would follow through. That's why his ruse worked. Because they would have done it. He had the power, and they knew he had the power, and he would have done it. That's why the mother says, no, don't do it. Not because she's going to sit there and say, excuse me, sir, but you don't have the judicial authority to kill that kid. Because the king has it. So that's where David HaMelech had this power. He could kill, he could go to order Uri to the front. And because he was a king. Once it was determined that Uri was Mori b'Malchus, was treasonable, did not fulfill the rules of proper respect to the king, David could kill him. So therefore, David was okay to kill him, and David was okay by retrospect because Uri had the get. Retrospect, it was okay for David to.
The question still remains: why did he send him to the front and not execute him then?
Okay, so that's a good question. I saw someone speak about it, but I didn't really focus on that. I think he wanted to maintain it a little bit hidden.
But I still don't understand why he was okay before the disrespect and everything to have the affair with Batsheva. That was
because
before.
She wasn't married.
But she was.
But she was given a get.
Okay, she was given a get, but she wasn't technically married.
We don't. Why? How do we know?
Right,
how do we know
right,
she was given a get on condition that he doesn't come back?
Because
but he didn't know she wasn't going to come back because he didn't know he was going to be.
So what you're saying is he didn't know. You're putting a situation. It's like what you're saying is a situation where, let's say, like Rabbi Sullivan always says an example. Let's say, to try and show the concept of what we mean by Safek Derais L'Chumra. There's a concept that if you have a question about a biblical law, you always have to be stringent. So he says, say you have a case, it's a piece of meat. You don't know if it's kosher or not kosher, right? Okay, it's a question, right? So you sit there and say, listen, maybe I'm going to take a chance and eat it. And you take the chance and eat it. Then you go up to heaven and you say, you know something? It's been bothering me all my life. Now I can figure out, Mr. Angel, listen, there was that piece of meat I ate back then and there. Wasn't sure if it was kosher or not. Just tell me, was it kosher? And the angel says, lucky it was kosher. Oh, good. I don't have to. I'm off the hook. No, you aren't. The concept of being stringent when you have a question about a biblical law is to tell you that there's no gambling. Once it's stringent, so the point is what you're saying is that David, okay, you're going to do this, but at this point in time, she's still a married woman, and you're going to say, well, this will happen retroactively, she won't be married, but it's still not right. Right? You would sit there and say, isn't she somewhat of a married woman?
Because it would be like he'd have to know already that he was going to be rebellious and he was going to send him.
Well,
and also makes her, how is she deserving of it also? Like
it
doesn't, like she's an adulteress.
But, okay, so the fact is, what you're saying is, yeah, technically you...
And he did say chatati.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Technically, it's all fine, right? She wasn't married, which, by the way, is interesting over here, because no one has asked the question, well, she's still not married to him, right? So obviously this is an indication that premarital relations is what exactly is the prohibition of premarital relations, but no one was concerned about it here. If she was not married, it was less concerned. There's actually enforcement say that if you look at the verse, there was concern about her being Anita at the time. And it was okay, she wasn't married. How do you know she wasn't Anita? That's why in the verse says over there that she was interesting verse here that says that she was Mekadeshet mitumata, which means she was purified from her tuma, which seems to me that she wasn't Anita, so that was okay. It's just a married woman. The fact that she's not married, this is an interesting question. What exactly is the prohibition for premarital relations within Jewish law? It's not so simple. We don't like to say that too much, but the fact is that okay. The point is that what you're working out is all these technicalities, but exactly your point is the issue over here. So David's scot-free on technicalities. Good, we got that, and that's what the Gemara on Shabbos means. That if you say David sinned, you're wrong. He had it all worked out technically, but let's face it. There's a little bit of something not too kosher about this, right? In other words, we can look at this and say, yeah, okay, technically, but still, she should have thought of herself as a married woman, and David should have seen her as a married woman, and is it right for David to arrange to kill Uriah Hittite in order to be able to get Batsheva? There's obviously certain connotations happening here that make it a little bit problematic, right? So this is something that Malbim points out, and other commentators as well, is that that's exactly the point over here. Is that really the idea of Nassan's story and so forth was that you can work things out technically that something's okay, but there's obviously a broader standard here. And sometimes you work things out technically, but you're not really seeing the bigger picture and saying, hey, maybe there's some questions over here of what you should do. And the fact is while halacha offers technical and specific direction, in looking at the broader perspective, it becomes to determine what really is proper behavior. You can't just look at the technical halachic details. You have to look at the broader perspective. And the broader perspective here is very leads to a very different perspective of the story. You have an attraction between David and Batsheva. we're not going to say that just David wanted to have a tryst, because if he just wanted to have a one-time experience with a beautiful woman, that he could have gotten over, that he had, right? And generally, and this is actually told from the story of Amnon and Tamar, if a person has only a sexual interest in someone, like he really has a sexual desire for someone, usually once they have one affair or one event, then there's actually a negative response to it. This is the story of Amnon and Tamar, where Amnon and Tamar were two children of David. And because of some technicalities, they weren't actually considered to be brother and sister or whatever, but Amnon always wanted to sleep with Tamar. And this is not the same Tamar as Yehuda, this is a different one. And always wanted to sleep with her. And eventually, Amnon rapes Tamar. And after he has this sexual experience with Tamar, he absolutely becomes disgusted with himself and disgusted with Tamar, because he allowed his sexual drive to take over. If it was only sexual, so David would have, if David would have just a sexual interest in Tamar, in Batsheva, then after he satisfied his lust, he would have looked at it and said, I can't believe I did that. He would have been disgusted with himself. He would have been disgusted with Batsheva. I don't want this woman around me, and so forth. Because that's a response. Once you get, if it's only one sexual act because of this lust for this beautiful woman, one event, it would have ended. But the truth is it obviously is a story of a strong attraction with love. David doesn't want to give up Batsheva, right? David doesn't. And later on, Batsheva comes to David and says, "I want Shlomo to be the king," right? Obviously, there's an attraction between the two. Batsheva is actually, forms that attraction. The fact is this is formed from the concept of Batsheva's idea that he'll have children with Bathsheba. But there's actually a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says that was predestined from 6 days of creation that David should marry Batsheva. You know the famous statement that says that 40 days before the birth of a child, it's announced that so and so will marry so and so. The idea that marriage is it's preordained of who you should be in love. The idea that you have two neshamas, really connected, and they're somehow separated. They have to find each other in love and so forth. So the fact is the Gemara Sanhedrin seems to allude to that. Okay, although there are otherwise. What? Well, there's actually a Yaakov Enden that says, in another context, he says, because there's a concept that Gemara says your Zivig Rishon is the first person you marry is your Zivig Rishon. That's the one that's announced 40 days that this is your beshert. And then there's the concept of Zivig Sheni, which is where God tries to figure out, put together some puzzle pieces, from the halves. And Rabbi Yaakov Enden says, don't think Zivig Rishon means simply in temporal time. It doesn't mean the first person you marry, which is the way a lot of Chassidim like to understand it, right? First person you marry and so forth. But the fact is, Rabbi Yaakov Enden says, it doesn't mean the first person you marry. Zivig Rishon is a quality of Zivig. That's your prime Zivig, but it doesn't have to be the first person you marry. It says, look at David HaMelech. Who was his Zivig Rishon? Was it Michal? Was it Abigail? Was it? We don't know. The fact is that it's a concept that it's not temporal. You could have your Zivig Rishon be, a second marriage or whatever. But the fact is, and there's actually some concepts in the Zohar about this that you see Batsheva got married to. He seems to imply in the Zohar that Batsheva was David's Zivig, but you see, if you don't act fast enough, you can lose your Zivig Rishon. So things happen. But it seems to be that there was a strong attraction between David and Batsheva that was for all the reasons that people should be attracted. And within Jewish thought, this expresses itself sexually, because we don't have that negative view of sexuality that other religions have. The fact of the matter is as Shabura says, it says over there that there's the famous statement that a man is to leave his house and be with his wife. Yita kabasar echad. A lot of people say it should be like one being. And a lot of people say it's the child, right? This is the idea you should have a child. So the Rav says the purpose of marriage is not to have children. The reason children are the result of a marriage is because marriage is the binding together of two people, and sexuality is the physical binding together of what should also be a spiritual binding together. So there's a very romantic view of marriage within certain views of Judaism. So it seems to be that David and Batsheva had this type of attraction. So the fact is that if you look at it that way, you see that there's a certain aspect where there was something about David's interest in Batsheva which was not just lust. There was something which had some value to it.
Just from seeing her bathe.
Well, that's you know something. It's a very strange thing, the role of sexuality with love. Everyone talks about love and sex and whatever, but if you think about it, I know when I talk about this, it's like you're going to decide of who you're going to marry and set up your whole life with, and who you're going to have your children with, and so forth, based upon a initial perception. Well, she looks nice, he looks nice. And the fact of the matter is that sexuality does play a role, and the fact is that it's something that most people don't investigate. But it seems to me that there is something about the sexual drive that has something to do with the attraction of souls and the attraction of something, and that's a very difficult thing for people to work with. Obviously, it can be misused like anything else, and that's where David HaMelech, that's where the issue comes with David HaMelech. That this is not just simply a lustful king saying, "Hey, let's try this one." Right, you know, so there's obviously a special attraction to this woman.
And why didn't he say Chatati still if he didn't?
So that's the point. That's really the point over here. What happens is that before nothing comes to him, he has it all worked out and he didn't do anything wrong. So that's really the remarkable thing about this story. And it's really a remarkable thing about Yehuda, and it's actually a remarkable thing about Teshuva that many people don't recognize.